I never imagined that morning would mark the end of a chapter I had poured my heart into building. The email was only 3 lines long, sent from the CEO, but I had to read it 5 times before I could accept what it meant. I had just been removed from the very project I had birthed and nurtured from scratch. It is difficult to explain what it feels like to have something stolen from you, something you created with nothing but passion and time. And it hurts even more when the signature at the bottom of that decision belongs to the same person who once told you that you were irreplaceable. My name is Olivia Wilde. I am 38, and I live in San Francisco. I have worked in media for over 15 years and truly believed I would grow old with the creative agency named Calliope. I gave it that name without even realizing it. I saw the company as my brainchild. When I joined Calliope in its 3rd year, I was just a freelance copywriter, but somehow I ended up shaping its content strategy, building emotion-driven marketing campaigns, and leading our creative team through times that felt like the edge of collapse. We were not selling services. We were selling stories, stories that made people remember, cry, laugh, and choose for the past 3 years. I served as Calliope's head of content strategy. My office was on the 3rd floor, overlooking Lombard Street, always sunny, always jammed with traffic. From there, I had the authority to turn down clients who did not align with our brand's soul. I could select the creative team for each campaign, and, most importantly, I was free to create meaningful value for brands navigating a brutal market. To me, it was more than a job. It was a belief system. I used to tell the younger members of the team that if I ever left this field, I hoped to be remembered as someone who inspired stories that mattered. I truly believed that, until I realized I was merely a supporting character in my own story. That morning started like any other. I arrived early, made myself a black coffee, and opened my laptop. On the calendar was a high-stakes pitch meeting for a major health tech client. This was the same project I had helped the team develop for over 4 months, late-night brainstorming, tight shoot deadlines, concept sessions that blurred into sunrise. I wrote the brief, chose the core idea, worked directly with the video producer, and even cast real people to make sure the message felt honest. Every frame of that campaign, every line of the tagline carried a breath of me, yet when the final pitch meeting came, I was not invited. At first, I thought it was a last-minute scheduling error, but then I saw the name on the screen, Emma Lynn, the newly hired junior creative assistant, who had not even been with us for a full year. She stood confidently at the front of the room, presenting the exact campaign I had carried from concept to execution. Her voice echoed the same tone I once coached her to use when speaking with clients. I watched from behind the glass panel, unable to enter, frozen in place as something inside me quietly cracked. After the meeting, I learned it was not just that one presentation. The entire project had been reassigned to Emma a week earlier, under executive orders, with the reasoning that we needed fresh energy and agility for the next phase, before I could even process that. An email from the CEO arrived. It thanked me for my early contributions and informed me that the company would be restructuring my position. No conversation, no explanation, just a quiet, clean, and final cut. I packed up my things in silence, while colleagues looked on with that particular kind of awkwardness that only happens when people already know but do not know what to say. I am not sure what hurt more, losing a job I had poured a decade of my life into, or realizing I had been betrayed by someone I once mentored. Emma had once been the shy girl who came to me for advice on her first campaign. I stayed late after hours teaching her how to build creative proposals. I comforted her when she cried in the bathroom after a harsh client call, and now she stood in my place, inheriting every seed I had planted. I did not go home right away. I drove aimlessly across the Golden Gate Bridge and ended up at an old cafe I used to frequent with my ex. We would sit there for hours, writing scripts and dreaming out loud, under the amber glow and the quiet jazz. I caught my reflection in the window, messy hair, sunken eyes, a face I barely recognized. I had given up my youth, my dream of being a writer, even a once beautiful marriage, just to hold on to this job, and now it no longer belonged to me. I arrived home around 11 that night. The apartment still smelled faintly of lavender from the candle I had lit the morning before, but everything felt out of place. I opened my laptop, thought about posting something on social media, but closed it again. I was not looking for sympathy. I did not need comforting words. What I needed was time to hurt, and time to understand. 4 days later, my older sister from Seattle called. She noticed my name had disappeared from the company website and suspected something was wrong. I gave her a vague answer, then broke down. It was the first time in years I had allowed myself to be vulnerable with family. I told her everything, about being removed from the project, about how Emma had been handed everything I built, and how I no longer believed in the idea of loyalty at work. She asked me one question: "Do you still believe in your own value?" I said nothing, because I honestly did not know. That weekend, I received an unexpected email. It was from Harold, an old friend who used to work in internal investigations for major media corporations. The subject line was brief: "There's something you need to know about Calliope." And in that moment, I realized my fall was not the end. There were mornings when I woke up and could no longer find a reason to dress up. No more emails to answer, no more deadlines chasing me through lunch, no back-to-back meetings pushing me into survival mode. The small apartment turned eerily silent. The ticking of the clock sounded like it was echoing through my chest, reminding me how deeply I had grown used to the urgency of a fast-paced life. And now that everything had come to a halt, I no longer knew where to go. But in that silence, for the first time in years, I heard my own voice. It was not rushed, not trying to please a boss or persuade a skeptical client. It asked one simple question: what do I still have? And where do I begin again? I opened the email Harold had sent. The attachment was a folder filled with internal documents, payroll data, email threads, and minutes from board meetings dated 3 months prior. They pointed to one undeniable truth. My removal from the director role was not just a reaction to competitive pressure. It had been orchestrated, a deliberate plan carried out by Emma and a board member named Eric Winters, the same Eric I once helped during a major PR crisis. Eric had risen fast in the company, known for his ambition and psychological finesse with clients. But I never imagined that the same person who once called me the big sister of the team would be the one plotting to hijack my work from within. Harold, once an internal investigator for a major media firm, now works independently. When he heard I had been let go, he reached out, suspecting manipulation inside Calliope's new leadership circle. What he gave me was not just information, it was proof. It confirmed everything my instincts had been whispering to me all along. I printed the documents, arranged them neatly into a black folder, and slid it into the bottom drawer of my home desk. I did not plan to use it immediately. I was not in a rush. One thing I had learned after the fall was that time was not only for healing, but for watching. I needed to understand where I stood before deciding where to go. A week later, I received an unexpected invitation to a communications industry symposium hosted by a nonprofit. The topic was emotional marketing and authentic value in the post-mass media era. I did not know anyone on the organizing team, but the sender's name was familiar: Olivia Perkins, a judge from a national creative competition I had placed third in 7 years ago. We had met only once, but she remembered me. She said she had been following Calliope's campaigns for years and noticed that my voice had vanished from them lately. I did not explain. I simply nodded and accepted the invitation. It was the first time I stepped out of the shadows since being cut from my old company. I wore a simple ash gray suit, tied my hair back, and applied soft makeup. Not to impress anyone, but to remind myself that I still had worth. At the event, I ran into several familiar faces, former colleagues who had also left Calliope, each for their own reasons. They asked what I was doing now. I smiled and said I was still figuring it out, but I was thinking about starting something new. The words came out lightly, but as I heard myself say them, I knew they were no longer just an idea. They had become something real. That evening, I met with Olivia Perkins at a small bar near the square. She told me about a support network for women who had been pushed out of the creative industry, a space where they could share resources, collaborate, and even access seed capital from anonymous investors. I listened in silence, then suddenly began to cry, not from sentimentality, but because for the first time, someone genuinely believed I still had a chance. Olivia placed a hand on my shoulder and said something I would never forget. You may no longer be at Calliope, but the spirit of Calliope has always lived inside you. That one sentence stirred something old, but real, within me. That night, I returned home and reopened the folder titled Unapproved Concepts on my laptop. It was where I had stored ideas that never got greenlit, proposals rejected for being too idealistic or not commercially viable. I reread every script, every pitch, every dialogue. Some lines still gave me chills, reminding me exactly how I had felt while writing them. They still held value, and this time, I would not let them be wasted. I began to take action. First, I made a list of former collaborators who had left Calliope because they too had lost faith in the leadership. I sent out emails, one by one, making no grand promises. I simply said I was trying to build a new space, one where creativity would be respected, where meaningful campaigns could live again. Within 2 weeks, I received 8 replies agreeing to meet. One of them was Thomas Geller, Calliope's former CFO, now working independently with startups. Thomas was the first to ask about legal frameworks, in case I wanted to build an independent media company. He did not say much, but as he left the cafe, he handed me a card and said, "When you are ready, I will help you lay the foundation." I started reviewing old brand building materials, learning more about corporate law and how to raise community funding, not because I wanted something big, but because I refused to repeat old mistakes. I learned how to write a pitch deck, practiced my presentation skills alone in the mirror, and met with old friends to exchange ideas. At a startup expo in Oakland, I reconnected with a former client from an environmental campaign when I shared my vision for a content studio built on emotional marketing and real value. He immediately introduced me to an angel investor named Marcia. A week later, I had a private meeting with her in a top-floor office overlooking the bay. She did not ask about my past. The only thing she wanted to know was what I planned to do next. I spoke for 18 minutes. When I finished, Marcia looked at me and said, "I invest in people, not plans, and you are someone I want to bet on." That night, for the first time in 3 months, I slept deeply and without dreams. I had not won yet, but I knew I had stepped out from the bottom. I never intended to return with noise. I felt no need to declare anything, no urge to shout that I had once been betrayed, pushed out of the very creation I had poured myself into, or stripped of trust in the people I once trusted most. But the plans I had quietly laid out over the past 3 months had finally reached the moment when they needed to become real. since receiving the investment commitment from Marcia. I had been working with my former team to lay the groundwork for a new creative studio called Lumen, founded on the values of genuine emotion and sustainable communication. The name was no coincidence. It meant the smallest unit of light, and to me, it also meant the smallest, yet most essential thing needed to see the truth. I had once been swallowed by darkness, and now I wanted to restore light for myself and for those who had been dismissed like I was. Lumen began as a 6-person remote team. We exchanged ideas through video calls, stayed up late discussing scripts, and for the first time in years, I felt the energy of my 20s return, the kind that came from believing in a purpose, not a performance metric. Thomas Geller helped restructure our finances, legal framework, and partner networks. Harold, from time to time, sent updates about the internal chaos unfolding at Calliope, which was now scrambling to keep up with TikTok trends and hollow viral campaigns. I did not feel satisfied seeing them lose their way, but I remembered every detail he sent, because I knew that even a small breeze at the right moment could knock a seemingly sturdy ship off course. Our first project came from a small startup fund focused on mental health products for postpartum women. Their budget was modest, but their story was real, and we believed in it. I worked with a young screenwriter to revise the entire script, centering it on a single mother as our lead and choosing to keep her stretch marks visible throughout the ad. The video not only surpassed all expectations in shares and engagement, but was also mentioned on a popular talk show. From a humble campaign, Lumen began to be recognized as a fresh voice in emotional marketing. And with that, calls from larger brands started to come. I knew that if I wanted to make a true comeback, I would need to strike not with vengeance, but with undeniable effectiveness. By our 4th month, a former client of mine from the Calliope days reached out. It was a clean food corporation I had handled for 3 years. They said they were unhappy with their new campaign done by Calliope, describing it as recycled and lacking the authenticity it once had. I did not ask questions. I simply offered to send a proposal and promised they would not pay if unsatisfied. A week later, I submitted 3 versions of the concept, including a sample video I had personally written, storyboarded, and narrated using the real voice of a farmer in California. That campaign not only won them back, but also went viral across platforms as a model for depth-driven communication. 3 weeks later, for the first time, I saw the name Lumen listed alongside Calliope in a bidding round for $1 million campaign by a top electronics brand. Emma was now leading the Calliope team, and I heard through a source that she felt confident, having strong ties with the client. I had no interest in personal rivalry, but when I saw their leaked proposal and recognized sections that matched documents I had authored 2 years earlier, I knew it was time to act. I did not confront or accuse. Instead, I rewrote the strategy from the ground up, deliberately challenging the old approach by using hard data and real user testimonials to show that the public no longer trusted overly polished messaging. The pitch took place in a luxury hotel in downtown San Francisco. I wore a simple white shirt, tied my hair up, and arrived with no title, just a storyteller standing in front of a room full of decision makers. When I finished my presentation, the room went strangely quiet. The marketing director of the electronics brand looked at me for a long time before asking, "Why are you working at a small studio like Lumen? When someone with your capability could be leading a global agency?" I answered with only one sentence. I was once at a big place, but no one listened to what truly mattered. I did not say it for effect. It was simply the truth. A week later, they awarded the contract to Lumen. Calliope lost, and Emma, for the first time, tasted the sting of defeat without understanding why. But I knew, because I had once stood in that same space and understood exactly what she was feeling. Then came interview requests not from clients, but from journalists. A prominent media industry magazine ran a special feature titled "The Most Powerful Comebacks by Women This Year," and my name appeared alongside leading female startup CEOs. I agreed to the interview not for the attention, but because there were things I had never had the chance to say. When asked about my departure from Calliope, I responded calmly, "Sometimes people do not remove you because you are weak, but because they know if you stay, you will become a threat to those trying to hold power." That quote went viral, becoming a source of strength for many who had been fired, broken, but not defeated. As Calliope continued to lose 2 more accounts, Harold sent me an internal report leaked by someone still inside the company. In it, leadership formally acknowledged a strategic direction crisis and noted growing internal division following the exit of several longtime staff members who had since joined Lumen. Emma had started missing key meetings. Eric, the one who had backed her, was now being questioned by the board for unclear budget allocations. I did not feel joy, nor sorrow. These were the natural consequences of what they had built, and they no longer concerned me. But there was one thing I still waited for, a sign that they knew I had never truly disappeared. That sign came in the form of a letter, not an email, but a handwritten note sent directly to Lumen's office. It was from Eric. In the letter, he admitted feeling isolated, having lost the team's trust, and asked to meet so he could revisit the story. I read it, folded it, and placed it in the drawer. I had no reason to see the man who once stood behind the plan to cut me out, but I felt no hatred either. I remembered what Olivia Perkins once told me, that what is sown with sincerity will always find its way back. I chose not to respond, because I had already answered them with something far stronger than words: results. There was a strange calmness that settled into the mornings at Lumen's new office. No longer the hurried footsteps of a big company, no more endless group chat pings like back at Calliope. We still worked with urgency, but it was a focused urgency. No longer chasing illusions, but moving towards something more lasting. I often sat alone in front of the concept board, reviewing the strategic outlines of our biggest upcoming campaign. A project that, if successful, would not only shift the future of Lumen, but also force the entire industry to rethink how it had practiced communication over the past decade. The project was called The Unseen, a content series dedicated to the invisible laborers of society, from community nurses and night shift drivers to rural school teachers. This time, the client was a national nonprofit focused on education and workforce connection, seeking to raise awareness and support for professions that existed without glory. I knew that if it had been the old days, Calliope would never have accepted a project like this. The profits would have seemed too low, but I saw in it a chance to return to what was real. Producing the video series took nearly 2 months and dozens of trips to unnamed places on the map. We captured scenes of a road repair worker asleep on a curb during his break, the trembling voice of a mother working night shifts cleaning offices, who said her greatest wish was to have one Sunday dinner with her child. There were no actors, no stage lighting, only what was truly present in front of the camera. In those moments, I saw my team not just as professionals, but as true storytellers. I no longer needed anyone to validate my role as creative director. I already knew I was doing something that mattered more than any title ever could. As we prepared for the launch of The Unseen, I received a call from the organizer of an international media award. The person on the line invited me to be the keynote speaker for that year's event. themed Breaking the Old Frame Media as a Voice, Not a Tool. I paused for a moment, not because of pressure, but because I realized that for the first time, I was not stepping into the spotlight to prove myself right, but to speak on behalf of those who had once been told they were wrong. I accepted. 3 weeks later, I stood on stage in a large auditorium, lights focused on my face, silence holding the room. In my hand was a microphone. Behind me were clips from the unseen playing across a massive screen. I did not look into the camera. I looked directly at the front rows, where I imagined those who had been through what I had lived, those whose ideas had been stolen, who had left old companies quietly, carrying wounds no one saw. I spoke of the moment I sat in a familiar office and listened to someone else present my ideas while I was left out of the room. I spoke of walking alone across the bridge that cold afternoon, wondering who I was if I no longer had a job. But I also spoke of that first morning at Lumen, in a tiny space with just a wooden desk, a vase of dried flowers, and an old laptop. I described how I wrote the first lines of an idea that had no sponsors, but moved me to tears once it was complete. I never used the word revenge. I used the word return, and I emphasized that coming back was not about proving I was stronger than anyone else. It was about reminding the world that truth still has a place, no matter how long it has been buried. After that talk, Lumen officially became a name invited into the biggest bidding rounds. The same emails that once went to Calliope now filled my inbox. I still did not reply to the handwritten letters from Eric, nor did I answer the vague messages from Emma after hearing she had left Calliope following a failed performance review. I did not feel joy or triumph. I only felt that things were returning to where they belonged. A week before The Unseen was released, I received a request from a major television network to produce a feature about Lumen's journey and my own. I hesitated. I had never wanted to be a symbol or a story myself, but then I realized there might be someone, somewhere, standing at the edge like I once was. And if this story could offer even a sliver of hope, then it would be worth telling. The interview was filmed in a small room, just a single camera, soft lighting, and a cup of cold coffee on the table. The host asked what I would say to my past self if I could return to the moment I was let go from Calliope. I paused, then said, "Feel every part of the pain, but do not stop there. What you are losing is not the end of your life." I did not cry. Only a long, quiet stillness filled the room, deep and honest, enough to show that strength does not come from never falling, but from learning how to rise after you've touched the bottom. 3 days later, The Unseen was released, like a natural current. It was shared across platforms, quoted on television, and adopted by universities as case material in courses on public communications. I did not appear in a single shot, but my name appeared in the final credit line with a simple note: creative director, the one who tells what others do not want to say, but must be heard. That was the moment I knew I had returned, not as a broken version trying to reclaim a name, but as an entirely new Olivia Wilde. I no longer needed Calliope to affirm my value. What I was doing now was the clearest confirmation of it, that night. I sat alone in the office, watching the city lights flicker beyond the window. I thought of those who had once pushed me off the track, those who forgot that loyalty is not something that can be replaced. But I did not blame them anymore, because without that fall, I would never have learned how to build from the ground up, and I would never have created a place where everyone had a voice and everyone had a seat at the table. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and knew that tomorrow would begin a completely new chapter. I never imagined that my comeback would make the entire industry pause, nor did I ever think I would become a role model for anyone. But on that evening, as I stepped into the lobby of an international conference where Lumen was being honored for the most impactful social campaign of the year, I could feel a quiet but profound shift. It was not about the applause, and certainly not about the trophy placed in front of me. It was the eyes of those who once dismissed me, now unable to look away. They saw me, not as the Olivia who was pushed out of her former company, but as someone entirely different, someone who had stood tall on the very foundation they believed I could not build alone. I remember clearly the look in Emma's eyes when we unexpectedly crossed paths at that event. She was not there to accept any award, only attending as a guest of another company. Having left Calliope after more than a year, caught in its internal unraveling, when we met in the hallway, she froze briefly, then forced a faint smile. I nodded without speaking, holding her gaze with quiet calm. She needed no reminder, no confrontation from me. My silence had already spoken louder than any accusation. Long after I left, I knew Emma had tried to hold her position by every means she could. But when the campaign stopped resonating and her excuses grew stale, she became just another name removed, much like I had been. The difference was, when I was pushed out, I still had the trust of those who truly knew me. She did not. As for Eric, the man who had written me 3 letters and received no reply, he finally appeared at a conference where I had been invited to speak. I was standing by the coffee counter, holding a ceramic cup still warm to the touch, when I heard his voice behind me. "Lumen's doing well. Congratulations." I turned, my eyes steady, but not searching. He looked older than I remembered. He was still dressed sharply, but the confidence he once carried was gone, and perhaps for the first time, I saw him looking at me not as a former colleague, but as someone who had lost. I simply said thank you, then turned back to my table without another word. I did not need to remind him of what he had done. He could see it clearly enough in everything I had built since Calliope. After losing several major contracts and failing to retain its core staff, was forced to restructure. Part of the company was acquired by a foreign media conglomerate, while the rest was fragmented into small, independently run groups. No one mentioned the once award-winning campaigns anymore. No one spoke of the name that had once symbolized emotional storytelling. It was a quiet collapse, without drama, but powerful enough to teach those inside that a brand is not upheld by authority, but by trust. And once trust is broken, it cannot be bought back with budgets or trophies. I kept working with my small team at Lumen. We did not expand too quickly, nor did we recruit in bulk. We chose only those who truly wanted to create with heart. Once, an investor offered to buy a majority stake in Lumen for a substantial sum, on the condition that I remain CEO for 3 years. I declined, not because I craved control, but because I knew that if someone else ran Lumen purely for profit, every value we had built would eventually erode. I did not want a large company. I wanted a safe home where creatives could tell their stories without being forced to please anyone. One afternoon, as the sun tilted toward the sea and light spilled across the meeting room window, I sat alone rewatching videos from the unseen campaign, not to review performance, but to remember why we had started. One clip stayed with me. It showed a street cleaner at 4 a.m, sweeping quietly beneath a yellow street lamp. His reflective vest was soaked with sweat. In the voiceover, he said, "I don't need anyone to know my name. I just wish people would stop throwing trash on the ground." That was when I understood media is not about glorifying the storyteller. It is about lifting the ordinary into something unforgettable. And if I could help do that, even a little, then the journey had been worth it. Looking back, I no longer felt bitterness about what had happened. The betrayal, the stolen credit, being pushed out of a place I once called home. None of it wounded me the way it once did, because in the end, I got revenge not through anger, but through success. Not the kind of success that demands attention, but the kind that speaks quietly, undeniably. I had never confronted those who removed me, but they knew. Every step I took had left a mark on the road they once thought only they had the right to walk. I closed my laptop and poured myself a cup of hot tea. Outside, the city lights blinked on, and the crowd moved in its usual hurried rhythm. I was no longer part of that pace. I had created my own rhythm, slower, but steadier. The door opened, and a young team member entered with a stack of freshly printed materials. She had once been an intern, now in charge of content for our latest campaign. She looked at me and smiled gently. "Do you remember when I asked how not to get lost in this industry?" I nodded. She continued. "Now I think, as long as I'm working with people like you, I won't lose my way." I said nothing, only smiled, because I knew that was what I had always been working toward, a relationship built on trust, not contracts. That evening, I posted a short message online. No photos, no hashtags, just a question. If you were pushed out of a place once, would you have the courage to build something better for yourself? Then I turned off my phone, closed the window, and let the silence fill the room. I never needed everyone to admit I was right. I only needed them to stop underestimating people like me. And if someone out there is standing at the starting line, I hope this story will serve as a quiet message that sometimes the best thing anyone can do for you is to push you out of your comfort zone, because out there you will learn how to stand, how to return, and how to become someone who cannot be replaced.